Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would answer patron emails, and I thought that I would let you in on behind the curtain stuff. Is that a wrong phrase? You know me and idioms. Peek behind the curtain, right? Stacy this morning asked if I could compile all of our email Google Docs into one, because now that Google Docs has this like tab thing within a single doc. And I love the idea. I told her so, and I did it because we have over the years, Stacy and I developed, because she looks at all the emails and like puts the emails into various different docs depending on what is being emailed, and or she'll just forward the email directly to me. Like if it's a business inquiry that needs to be answered right away, like an interview request. Or sometimes she'll just send me nice emails where people aren't really asking anything, and the person is just saying, "Hey, I just wanted to say a nice thing here," and she'll just forward that to me. So anyway, we get a lot of emails, and I'm really happy about that because it keeps us moving forward with topics and ideas and things to talk about on the podcast. It's kind of like a democracy in a sense, because if I'm answering emails, it's for every emailed like I'm about to answer a couple of emails about gaslighting, and the only reason why I'm doing this is because I'm getting a number of emails, and like upper tier patrons are emailing these kind of questions. And what in all likelihood this represents is for every email, there's probably 100 or more people who have a very similar question, So I think it's a good way, because, I could talk about anything. There's so many things that I could talk about. And I have my list of formal deep dives, small and large, that I want to do. And it's a resolution of mine to actually do more little deep dives in 2025, because, if I just only do deep dives that are really involved, then I will miss out on these little things. I think I've talked about how I want to look into introversion. Part of it is just I just want to have good understanding, and also just good notes on the topic. But anyway, so one of the benefits of putting all of the emails into one Google Doc is that when I am talking about a subject like gaslighting, I can do a search for gaslighting within the Google Doc, and I can address everyone's question, regardless of whether you're an upper tier patron or you're not even a patron, or you're not even a YouTube member, or I can answer the question, and then after I answer it, I can do a search by gaslighting, and there might be 5 other emails that I basically answered, and therefore I can actually delete those emails because they shouldn't come up again, because I answered the email, basically, so my mild OCPD kicking in of wanting to have everything be tidy and not have too much work for us, The other thing is that now that I've put all these email docs into one doc, the document is extremely data heavy. There's it's a large file, and it takes a long time to load, and there's lagging. And what that motivates me to do is actually to clean up the email. I also have docs, so I have a tab for every level of patron / YouTube member tier, and then I have a doc for Berto and a doc for Bob, and a Google Doc, a tab for Rebecca, for emails that are in their camp, if you will. But anyway, so and while I'm on the topic of just peeking behind the curtain, I don't know, it just kind of sounds dirty. Anyway, and I think I've talked about this already, but I just want to reiterate that I recently, as a part of trying to tidy things up and also just trying to scale back, I've talked about this before, that I don't have great work-life balance, and although I've done a lot of, I've taken a lot of measures to have more work-life balance, I have not reached where I want to be. and I am constantly like trying to shave off work, and also just shave off work for Stacy and the others, because why should they also have to do unnecessary things? So one of the things that I did is I looked at the website and pared things back there. The website isn't ideal, but I know that just around the corner is an AI product that will be maybe even free by Squarespace or something, that will help people to find, because we have thousands of episodes, and the title and even the description of the episode doesn't necessarily describe what we talked about, right? Especially if there are tangents or there's a number of emails that we answered. So another thing that AI would be able to do is it would be able to, crawl through everything that's said, and also tell you if we answered your email, because it would have your name, right? And so you'd be able to search eventually for like gaslighting, and it would pull up every episode. It would show you a little quote. They already had, like a fan of the podcast actually, like a year or two ago, actually developed a tool like this, but it wasn't being made for prime time. It was just like a project that the fan was working on, and it was really interesting to one of the things that I remember doing is I was like, I wonder what episode Bob first appeared in, the first episode where I was with Bob, because it's not in the descriptions necessarily. And so instead of just scrolling through every single episode, I did a search for the word Bob and discovered the very first episode. I think it was 2017. Just other stuff like that. It's just really interesting so AI will be able to do that, and because a lot of the clutter on our website had to do with trying to help people find the right episode, or have a list of episodes within a certain topic. Like I had a category of personality disorders or something like that, and what I found was that people weren't using these pages, and it was just cluttering things up. And the pages are really janky. And Stacy, God bless her, she has it's just so tedious to, whenever, every day with the new episode, she has to figure out what category to put that episode in addition to posting it on 3 other tabs on our website. So I took down that, and I also took down. So anyway, my point is that right now there's a list on the website of every episode, every audio episode, but it's not ideal. But eventually, in terms of trying to find the right episode, but eventually, I'm going to take a guess and say within the next 2 or 3 years there will be a very useful AI search engine, and maybe even a tool where you just click a button and you say, play me all the clips that involve this just in succession, just from different episodes, right? So that'll be around the corner, I assume. I actually looked into having this product a couple of years ago or a year ago, and I was an AI company reached out to me, and I went down the road of getting a quote from them and everything, and it turned out to be something like $50,000, which we can't afford, but or maybe more than that, because it would need to hold on to audio, potentially. Anyway, so I'm sure that just around the corner it'll be a lot cheaper and or just free, just like an app that comes free on your phone or whatever. So there's that. So as a part of that, I actually took down the page on our website that had the patron premium episodes. Most of you probably don't know this because you didn't use it, but when I first started on Patreon and I first started having premium episodes, the Patreon app, which I don't even know if it existed, but the Patreon website in 2015 was terrible. It was mainly designed for art and music artists, because the guy who started it from Pompaloose, I think, right? He Jack someone, he was in a band, and God bless him, that he started it, but it was not made for frequent podcast episodes. It was made for posts that you would put out like once a month, kind of a thing. And with thousands of episodes that we had, maybe by then we had like 1,000 episodes. It was just impossible to find an episode. And get this, when you would search for a keyword, they didn't include the titles of the episodes. So if you did a search for borderline, for example, on Patreon, and this was true until just a couple years ago. If you did a search by borderline on our, a couple years ago, it would have been like 1,500 episodes or something. It would only search the description, not the title. You know how stupid that is? It should be at least the opposite, Like if you're searching for borderline, search the title at least, and then on as an extra, search the description, So Stacy had to do a whole workaround with that of like including the title in the description. It's so stupid. So Patreon was basically useless, aside from being a very trusted subscription service, for people to sign up and the credit card thing and all that kind of stuff. And so to give people access to the premium feed, the main way that I was pushing people to use was this premium URL that I actually would design. I would have to use like HTML coding and I don't know why I'm going into this detail, but and some people had a really hard time with that, and I understood that because the whole custom URL in your podcast app, it was just so cumbersome and annoying. And so what I ended up doing was just having a workaround where I had a password protected page on our website in which I would give the password to patrons, and then they could go to that page and then they could just listen to all the premium episodes on that page. The problem is that the password had to be universal, right? So I would give the password to all the patrons whenever they signed up, and if people were to cancel their Patreon, then they would still have access, right? And it'd be pretty easy to give that password. I imagine most people aren't doing that kind of thing, and and as long as this thing is still moving down the road financially, I don't really care if there's a couple moochers, it's because it's like, who cares? So it wasn't that big of a deal, but it was, it was pretty cumbersome, and it was yet another thing that Stacy would have to monitor, and it was particularly in focus when Stacy and I were on a road trip recently, because she would have to upload those episodes while we're on the road as those episodes were being released, right? And we had to bring those episodes with us on like a thumbstick, or I can't remember, and then we forgot like halfway through the road trip, or when we got back, I was like, oh, we forgot to upload, and I was like, why are we doing this? Because at this point in 2024, it's so much easier to use Patreon, and a lot of people are using Patreon. I've surveyed y'all, and there's been a pretty sharp increase over the years of people using Patreon for exclusive episodes. And when we started working with Acast, if you're familiar with that whole thing, to get the premium feed on your phone on the podcast app, that's a lot easier. It's still pretty cumbersome and stupid. I mean, considering that this is Patreon, and considering that it's podcasting, it's not the small little thing it was in 2005, and yet we haven't figured out yet how to do. It's so stupid. And there's all these different methods, like Spotify has its own method. Anyway, it's just really, I feel like podcasts are this neglected area in media and commerce and capitalism. Maybe that's a good thing. I mean, when I say it out loud. But anyway, so the three methods of getting premium episodes were on the website, on Patreon, and through this custom URL thing. And I found that people were using the website less and less and less. So I took that down. And so if you're one of the people that's using the website, I'm sorry. The Patreon is really easy to use. You can install the app on your phone and lickety split. It's pretty easy to use. So there's that. Also, if you are one of those people that signed up on Patreon with a different email address, and all of your Patreon notifications are going to that other email, just know that whenever an episode posts or whenever I have an announcement or something, I will send it out, through email notification. Anyway, the other thing that I stopped was Tuesday Tougher Bluff, or what I'm going to stop on January 1st, 2025, is both the Facebook page and the Tuesday Tougher Bluff. So the Facebook page, it's pretty easy to, I'm just going to hibernate it. I'm not going to delete it because there's just like a lot of, what if I want to start up again, and there's just so much data and posts and stuff. And so there's that. But I'm going to be on Instagram. We're going to still do Instagram, kind of. The thing that I found about Facebook and Instagram is that it was, half of the reason why I want to hibernate Facebook is that people are DMing me through Instagram and through Facebook. And that's, nice of people, but it is just yet another, so the thing is I'm trying to get work-life balance, right? And if I really do not want to scale back on content. I don't, I put 3 audio episodes a week. We have 2 reruns a week. And then I will, on the YouTube channel, either have like 14, 15 episodes a week during the high volume times, like with Love is Blind, or I'll have 3 episodes a week. And I really do not want to scale that back. I can't imagine where I would scale back. Not just because of the fans, what they would want, but just me. Even if no one was paying attention, because no one was in the beginning, like I'm really dedicated. This is one of those things that I just enjoy making and doing, and getting out there and advocating for things, and talking with my best friends on the microphone, and so I really don't want to scale back on content anymore, because I scaled back on YouTube quite a bit in the last year and a half-ish. And so something else has got to go. And so the Facebook thing, although not huge, it's not a huge time suck, but every little bit, right? And so there's that. And the tougher bluffs actually take a long time. Some of you probably know, but some of you don't. If you've ever tried to devise or develop a quiz that is actually entertaining, like if you ever do like pub trivia, or if you are making a board game or something, it is really hard to come up with a tough or a true or false question that is interesting to people, And not only that, but I have to put sound science out there, right? I can't just willy-nilly it, right? And I actually looked into AI developing this, and AI is terrible. I'm guessing maybe there's some product out there that will be able to do this, but all the AIs, they just make shit up. And so it's completely unreliable. You would think AI would be able to do this, but it's not. So I've spent a lot of time on that. I have to troll all the research. I have to read the research, which isn't easy to read. I have to find access to it. I have to make sure that the statement that I'm saying is actually true. Like when I give the answer, I have to like format it so that the question isn't convoluted and too long and too confusing. I have to post it and schedule it, and there's all these little, posting stuff on Facebook. I just have to tell you, if you're a business, it's such a pain in the ass. Like that interface is just so jumbled and stupid. YouTube is a lot better, but it still takes a lot of time. So, but it bums me out because I started Tougher Bluff. I think like in 2009. We started actually doing Tougher Bluff on the podcast in 2008 when we started the podcast, but I started formally doing it on Facebook in 2009 or 2010 or something. And rain or shine, every Tuesday I've been doing this thing. And whether I was on vacation or sick with COVID, I would post this, and it bums me out. But I really don't want to cut back on content, and I don't think that that's going to happen. And so another part of this is that when I started this podcast, and forgive me if you listened to me talk about this in a recent YouTube video or live stream or something, but for those that only listen to the audio podcast, I feel like I just want to get this out there. I started the podcast 2008, and from the beginning, for many years, all I wanted to do was just talk into the microphone with my friends and interview people. I just wanted to record an audio podcast and post it and move on. And that's the sort of consumer that I was. I would never go to a web. I was very loyal to podcasts at the time, like This American Life or something, but I never went to their website, and I never went to their Instagram. I'm sure they had an Instagram eventually. I never did that. And it always kind of bugged me when I would be a fan of a podcast, or I guess later a YouTube channel, and I would hear them talk about how much time they spent on all these other things. And I'm thinking, the core of your product is the content. It's not these random posts that might go viral on TikTok, because TikTok is just, it's a whole other ball of wax. It's super annoying, and it does not fit with my style of content because as I talked about in a recent episode, am a yammerer for a variety of reasons, some problematic, some not. And in order to explain things, I need to have a lot of caveats. And TikTok, you can only have posts that are so long, And I just found that the audience on TikTok just doesn't get it. And it sucks. But again, I just don't have time. And I found that the people who were fans of this podcast were not dying to have me on TikTok. Some people were, but just more out of a hope for me to make it big on TikTok or something. And I did have one TikTok that got like millions of views. It was bizarre. I was like, what's going on with this one? But anyway, so along those lines, like by far the one post that had the most eyeballs on it was this one TikTok video, because none of my YouTube videos, I think I have a couple that are almost 1 million. But anyway, so I never really wanted to do anything else. I even reluctantly went on YouTube in the beginning, but a student of mine, she just kept hammering me about it because she was younger. She's like, people use YouTube for this kind of thing. I'm like, okay, fine. And so in the very beginning, I was using YouTube because the very beginning, all the episodes were video. We had a video crew and an audio crew. But anyway, once it became an audio podcast product, so I always reluctantly would have all these accounts, like with Twitter and with Discord and with Instagram and with Facebook and I guess YouTube. What else? There's other, even the website I didn't want to start because I just didn't want to clutter my life. I didn't want another thing to take care of. I'm very protective of my time, and I'm very impatient. And I just never really ascribed to the notion of virality. And because, the things that I consumed, I would come across because of the quality, right? And maybe it would take me a while to find it, but the things that were viral were not the kinds of things that lasted in my attention, and just the things that I like in my life, I didn't like because of it going viral, like I fell in love with my wife, not because she went viral, but because of the quality of our connection and just how great she is, I don't know why that came into my head, but you know what I mean? So I just never really thought that social media, like who's finding a podcast? Now, maybe some of you are like, hey, I found you through Facebook. Your thing came up on a thing, and then I looked into it. And yeah, but I'm guessing that's pretty rare. YouTube is kind of like a social media site, and according to surveys that I've asked you about, like a huge number of you have found us through YouTube and just Google searching, So, and plus I don't want to be any bigger. I like where I'm at, and if anything, going viral would actually be a bad thing for me, because when I had increased fame in 2022 during the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, like that was rough for me. It took me I'm still kind of recovering, but it took me about a year to recover from that, and I don't want to do that again. So I vowed that I didn't want to get any bigger, and I don't want any more fame. I like where I'm at, and if people find me, they find me, and if they don't, they don't, I guess. And also, what was I saying? Oh, so yeah, I pared back the website. I actually renovated the website. Revised the website about 6 months ago. I really like the way it is right now. I think it's the best it's ever been. According to experts, though, they'll look at my website and say it's a pile of crap. But I don't know. I don't like the new style of websites where like you have to scroll. You know how you go to the homepage and it'll just be like it looks like cinema or something, and it'll be this really awesome picture, and there'll be like 2 words on, and then you got to scroll down, and then there's another 3 words and a different picture. For some websites, I think that's fine, but it annoys me because it takes a while to get to what you need to get to. Anyway, so that's that. Also, I don't know if I've talked about the Kirkgram thing, with Cameo. It was such a pain in the ass. The app was a pile of shit for Android. I mean, just the worst. It was so non-functional, and I had multiple phones that it wasn't working, because I use Android. And people are like, well, you got to use Apple. It's like the vast majority of phones on the earth are Android-based. So it's not like Android is just like, and plus Android's made by Google. It's not a fledgling little OS, Anyway, so the fact that Cameo just couldn't possibly get off their ass and like address the Android glitches was it was enough. It made it non-functional. I would record a Cameo for someone and try to upload it, and long story short, it would basically glitch to the point where it would time out, and it would look like I wasn't delivering on the Cameo for that person because there's a time limit. And so I created this. At first, I was like, I just thought it'd be another thing I'd get rid of. But that one kind of hurt because it, for some people, they'll probably get a Cameo from me like once only, right? And it can be kind of a big deal. And I've received Cameos and given Cameos, and found them to be extremely delightful. Like the Cameos that I've received 2 Cameos, I think, and both of those were they were a big deal to me, and so I wanted to be able to do that, and so I created this thing called Kirkgram on the website. Now, Bob and Berto and Rebecca, I'm assuming they all use iPhone because their Cameos are working fine, and they're available on Cameo still, so that's great. So yeah. Also about merch, Stacy is working real hard on getting the merch situation locked down. If you ordered things and it took a long time to get to you, you're not alone. And Stacy gets real anxious about that. Like, she kind of obsesses about customer service in this way, and it just eats away at her that someone would order something and have to wait like a month or 2 to get it. And she's really anal about the quality of the merch as well. She's always designing it and ordering samples and getting upset about it not looking right or bad quality or something, or a T-shirt that fades over time. She gets real uptight. And so, I appreciate that. She takes a lot of pride in her work, and she is looking into another supplier that might be better but might not be. So just know that if you order merch in the near future, there's a chance. I would give it like a 30% chance that it might take a little bit of time to get to you, with the holidays and everything. So just consider that. But also know that Stacy's working real hard to figure out a solution for that kind of long term. Anyway, well, that was me yammering about that. Let's take a break and let's actually talk about gaslighting. All right, we're back from the break. Let's do an OPP. These people are middle tier patrons, and they have been a patron since 2022. We have Michelle from South Porcupine, Ontario. South Porcupine, Ontario. That's the name of... Is there a North Porcupine, Ontario? But that is a delightful name of a town. Morgan from Edmonton, Alberta. Sophia from Calgary, Alberta. Catherine from Ireland. Isabel from Luxembourg. You probably are our only person from Luxembourg, right? Natalie from Switzerland, Zurich. Catherine from London. Natalie from Grass Valley, California. Charlotte from Foothill Ranch, California. Diane from Grovetown, Georgia. Jessica from Irvine, California. Marilee from Salem, Oregon. Molly from Waldorf, Maryland. M from Albuquerque. Natalie, we've had 3 Natalies. Another Natalie from Edmond, Oklahoma. Someone who calls themselves 50 Shades of Grey for some reason from Basking Ridge, New Jersey. Lena from Corvallis, Oregon. Jonathan from Arlington, Texas. And Allison from God knows where. Thank you so much for becoming a patron and staying a patron for the past 2 years and also being a middle tier patron. So email from anonymous middle tier patron and YouTube member. She says, I'm a frequent listener of the podcast and I just went back to school in the hopes of becoming a forensic psychologist or maybe a marriage and family therapist. I've always been interested in psychology, but the reason I'm so passionate about those two things in particular is because I've learned within the past year that my husband, soon to be ex-husband, has been emotionally abusing me for nearly a decade. Just chiming in. I'm sorry to hear that, patron, that you're, well, it sounds like you're getting out of the relationship, which is good, but you've been through a lot of abuse. That's horrible. And I want to use my experience to help educate others and spread awareness about how power and control shows up in relationships and hopefully help create a happier, healthier society. So just chiming in here, for whatever reason, the forensic psychologist profession is a frequent aspiration for people along these lines, but typically forensic psychologists don't do the kinds of things you would think. I think people, when they hear forensic psychologists, they think like, NCIS or Sherlock Holmes or something. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, there's kind of an element of that, but you're really just pumping out the reports, and there's a format, and you're often a paid gun by the prosecution or the defense, and it can be kind of tedious at times. So just know that, before looking into before pursuing these professions, just make sure that you talk to 3 to 5 people that are actually doing that work instead of talking. I wouldn't even talk to professors necessarily, and I certainly wouldn't watch television as a model for that. But going on, my ex-husband is a highly successful CEO of a behavioral health hospital, and he has a master's degree in psychology. I would describe his tactics to be extremely subtle regarding the abuse, and he's highly skilled at selling others on his point of view in a way that is difficult to detect. One of the main tactics he used to maintain control in our relationship was through gaslighting, by making me question my reality and doubt my memories so that he could coerce me into complying with what he wanted me to think, feel, or believe about him and our relationship, and ultimately about myself. Yeah, that's the definition of gaslighting there. From listening to your channel, I know there's a lot of misinformation that exists on this topic. I also understand that the term is used inaccurately often, but I also feel like there's a lot of people in the general public that are now calling this out. This is probably a good thing overall, but then it also can muddy the water for people like me who are legitimately experiencing it. Just chiming in. Yeah, it's a good thing probably overall. I would I'm pretty confident that it's a good thing overall because it wasn't being talked about at all before, and so the talk of gaslighting, whether it's being misused or not, is just a part of a larger movement of awareness of abuse that I would not have imagined we could achieve within my lifetime regarding just how aware the general public is about it. It's really interesting. We have more work to do, of course, but it was pretty grim 15, 20 years ago going on. The problem is that gaslighting isn't always so obvious. People online will say that gaslighters will use phrases like, "You don't remember saying that? Oh, wow. Are you sure you're doing okay? I'm concerned about you." What I experienced was much more sophisticated and difficult to detect, and I'm betting I'm not alone in that. I had to do a lot of research and record almost every conversation and play it back to get a full concept of what he was doing to create this sort of confusing, anxious, jumbled mess out of my memory and my brain each time we had a disagreement. And before you ask, yes, I am in therapy, psychoanalytic, attachment-based with some IFS elements, end of email. Well, first off, that combo is right up my alley, psychoanalytic, attachment-based with IFS elements. That's amazing. I don't use IFS, but I use similar kinds of elegant and down-to-earth concepts like schemas and that kind of thing. But anyway, but yeah, it's interesting that you've recorded these conversations and you play it back. And yeah, smart people can gaslight. This is anecdotal, but smart people can gaslight more effectively. Also, smart people are just smart. And when you look at them, you're like, well, they probably know what they're talking about. They don't usually misspeak or they don't usually make shit up. So yeah, it can be very, very subtle. And the way that people talk about it online is, overall a good thing. But, with the TikTok stuff, everything has to be reduced to this really short thing. And there's not a lot of things in psychology that actually lend itself to that. And so as a part of that, you have to have these TikToks that'll be like, has your partner said, I didn't say that, you said it. Well, then they're gaslighting you. It's like, well, maybe. Because it's also possible that a lot of the people who claim they're being gaslit are actually the ones gaslighting, because a lot of gaslighters don't know that they're gaslighting. Anyway, let's read another email about gaslighting. I'm going to do a search on this new Google Doc, this shiny new Google Doc, about all the gaslighting emails. All right, so there's a lot more emails about gaslighting. I'm gonna condense it. There's some emails that are overlapping, so I'm going to discard those for now. But this email is from annual middle tier patron Madi from Arizona. Oh, I have been mispronouncing your name. You email in a lot, which I appreciate. But I've been pronouncing it Mary, but it's a Japanese pronunciation of Madi. So please always include that because I'll probably forget. So Madi from Arizona, they say, "Hi, Dr. Kirk. I've heard you say quite a few times that selective memory or people having different memories or conflicts isn't the same thing as gaslighting. I've heard you say quite a few times that selective memory," right. So, well, the thing about gaslighting, it's just a part of a larger pattern of abuse. And the thing about a larger pattern of abuse is that you can't quickly assess whether or not someone's being abused unless it's pretty obvious, right? Like if someone's being beaten or tied up or something, which does happen, then it's pretty obvious. But a lot of abuse is not that. And it takes an expert and it takes some listening, right? Because you have to hear from maybe both sides, because like I said, a lot of abusers frame things as if they're being abused and they don't know that they're distorting, and they'll come across as being very believable. So it's just impossible to reduce these things to these simple criteria that everyone can use to detect things in a reductive, TikTok-y kind of way. But yeah, it's almost universal if not universal, that when you are in a romantic relationship or any close attachment in which conflict occurs, there will be two different stories, and both of them are distorted. And frequently people will get into arguments about, you said that, no, I didn't say that, you said that. And it's kind of a pointless conversation, or at the very least, the argument isn't usually very constructive. And everyone just needs to recognize that they might have actually said those things and they just don't remember. And they might also remember things that their partner said that or didn't say that are false. You just have to know that your brain is not a tape recorder. It's a mess of goo between your ears that is not designed to record things exactly. And your memories are just weird associative constructions that you made in the moment, and you're also you're changing as you're recalling them, and it's all through emotional filters and denial, and but that happens, and that's that. In the way I described it, that's not necessarily gaslighting. It can be, but it's not necessarily. And can you have two people that are engaging in that kind of fighting, that they are gaslighting each other in a sense, and they're not actually abusing each other? Yeah, that can happen. I don't know if I'm prepared to use gaslighting as a term in that situation. But anyway, going on with your email. It seems like you're differentiating true gaslighting from selective memory or things that are crazy making by intent. Gaslight has to be intentional. Just chiming in. No, I actually explicitly define my version, which I do not hear people talking about, not even necessarily in the clinical literature, that the vast majority of gaslighting is, maybe not the vast majority, but a good portion of gaslighting that's occurring in the world, and this would be impossible to measure, but it's just anecdotal, is being perpetrated by someone that is not intending on gaslighting. They are distorting, and they are, I always bring up this one example, and this isn't exactly gaslighting, but you could imagine if this blossomed, it would be gaslighting. I had a client that it was a couple, and the wife was convinced that I had said that she was a piece of shit in session. And I remember it was like yesterday, but it was many years ago. And she was absolutely convinced, and it took me months to get her to think that maybe I didn't say that. And it's such an absurd claim, but she believed it. She believed it because of her relational traumas and her personality disorder, which is, normal stuff for someone like me that specializes in this. This happens all the time. People with personality disorders in particular will distort as a matter of course. It's just, it's going to happen, particularly as they get close to me. So it's okay. It's normal. If I was in a romantic relationship with one of these people and I didn't know any of this stuff, then I would start to question, and because they can be really intense. It's not like they're just saying in passing, hey, you called me a piece of shit. They're yelling at you, you called me a piece of shit, you need to believe it. And the perpetrator of that is not doing that voluntarily. They believe that you called them a piece of shit because they had a borderline psychotic break from reality. That's why we call it borderline. And they believe something that didn't happen. So you could start to question your reality, especially if you match it up with a lot of emotional control and coercion and intimidation with fear. So there's that. But there's also intentional gaslighting, where psychopaths, con artists, bad actors will attempt to do this, or high-controlled individuals, like a cult leader who knows that they're manipulating people, a church leader, this kind of thing. Anyway, going on. However, I can imagine that gaslighting perpetrators can be relied upon to tell the truth about their intentional gaslighting, especially to their victims. Just chiming in, yeah, I doubt I ever said otherwise. An intentional gaslighter will never admit it. Yeah, they would never, even if they were caught red-handed, which would be hard to do because it's an overall pattern. They would never admit it. I'm wondering if it's ever happened. I've treated perpetrators, and I guess as a matter of that whole change for perpetrators. They will eventually admit they're gaslighting, but that is just a part of the overall acceptance of their past abusive behavior. It's actually a really beautiful thing to watch, to see a perpetrator make that transition. It takes time, but it involves a lot of shame, but it also involves a lot of liberation for the perpetrator, because at the end of the road, they are, and they see this, if I'm doing things right, that they're able to realize their needs. They, through the course of treatment, realize that they're being abusive because they're desperate for attachment, and they have a very fucked up way of managing attachment, and they've never had attachment that really fulfills them, but they'll take coercive attachment over no attachment. But when you give them the roadmap of actually having real attachment, then they're just over the moon going on. Within your framework, how can victims of gaslighting feel confident that they're actually describing their experiences? Within your framework, how can victims of gaslighting feel confident that they're accurately describing their experiences? Well, just chiming in, with victims, it takes a long time, in the typical treatment scenario, to extract the individual from the high control relationship, including the gaslighting. Another way you can think about gaslighting is that it's a part of an overall abusive cycle of mind control and of brainwashing. Gaslighting is a method to better brainwash and better control, right? So that gets into people's heads, and it can take potentially decades actually to dismantle that. It's really hard. And I think it does victims a disservice to claim that you can quickly analyze and assess these kinds of things. And in my experience, that when you provide the more simplistic, knee-jerk reaction of diagnosing gaslighting from afar in this very ham-fisted way, what it ends up doing is actually giving perpetrators more power, because they will use that, and they will either inadvertently use it. Like with the example of my client who believed forwards and backwards that I said that she was a piece of shit. Well, I and her husband set out, mainly me, but her husband would also chime in and say, he didn't say that. He didn't say anything even close to that. He wasn't even angry at you. You're misremembering, honey. And then I would say all the things that I was saying, and also eventually just talk with her about borderline distortions. But for her in the beginning, she could have, and she might have thought that I was gaslighting her, and that me and her husband were gaslighting her. So to provide this very simplistic, reductive way of analyzing or identifying gaslighting, it can very easily just give perpetrators more power. So it's complicated, and it's rough, and it sucks, because you have victims out there who are behind closed doors being abused and gaslit and brainwashed, and no one sees it. And how do you help them? How do you reach them? How do you validate them? How do you extract them? Because they themselves don't even know that they're being victimized. They think they deserve it. They think this is the natural way of things, especially after being beaten down verbally. And I understand the anxiety around that, and I understand the fear, or I think your email might be exhibiting that fear and that care, which is great. But I don't think we should dilute or reduce or simplify a very complicated thing in an attempt to validate them. And also, like I said, to do that might actually be validating the perpetrator, or even giving the perpetrator some ammunition. going on. I like accurate terminology, but it also feels wrong to me to imagine that victims of this behavior would effectively need their abusers to sign off on the language they use to describe it. End of email. I guess I don't understand. It sounds like you're reacting to something that I said. And if I said that the perpetrator needs to validate it or the perpetrator needs to agree that they're gaslighting, that is, I misspoke. That's the dumbest thing I could have ever said. If I implied that, that's stupid. Yeah, of course. To help gaslighting victims or to validate them, we do not look to the perpetrators. All right, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. So these people became patrons in end of 2022, and these patrons are at the mug level, the upper middle tier patron. We have Skylar Jocelyn G, good old Jocelyn G. We have Charlene and Katie and Gina and Feather, all from God knows where, which is kind of confusing because in order for us to send you a mug, we have to have your address. So it's kind of funny. It's like people at the higher tier levels are less likely to have their address on Patreon. And, to be clear, I'm never going to spam or reveal your address. I'm always, I also don't even say your last name when I give a shout out because I'm not sure if people are cool with it, So I'm always saying first name and where you're, the town that you're in. And sometimes I won't even identify the town because I'm like, it looks like a small town. It looks like it'd be pretty easy to figure out who that person is. And then also we have one patron from the highest tier who is still a patron since the end of 2022, and their name is None. And they also are from God knows where. But it's totally cool if you want to be from God knows where. As long as you're a patron and you stay a patron, you're one of my favorite people on the planet. All right, combing through all of the emails in all of the tabs about gaslighting. Here's another email. Annual patron Manny from London. She says, "Hey, Dr. Honda, great news. There is a New Yorker article about gaslighting and about the popularity of the term and its misuse. It's not short, but I think you'd get something from reading the whole thing." I took a look at it, and I didn't read the whole thing, but it looks good. And typical New Yorker style, it's kind of a narrative. It starts off with like a personal story. Anyway, but looking at your email again, you say, "Based on what I've learned from you and through your content, I think the article is fairly accurate. However, there is one paragraph where the writer wonders if parents don't always gaslight their kids. Quote, I had started to wonder about so this is a quote from the article. I had started to wonder about the ways I might be unintentionally gaslighting my daughter, telling her that she is just fine when she clearly isn't, or giving her a hard time for making us late for school by demanding to wear a different pair of tights, when it is clearly my own fault for not starting our morning routine 10 minutes earlier. In these interactions, I can see the distinct mechanisms of gaslighting at work, albeit in a much milder form, taking a difficult feeling, my latent sense of culpability whenever she is unhappy, or my guilt for running behind schedule, and placing it on her." End of quote. Yeah. Wow. Well, it's not as bad as other misuses, but you would think that an author, having talked to experts and looked at this whole thing, you think that they wouldn't write such a silly thing. So if I am charitable about this, what the author is saying is not that I'm gaslighting my kids, but that I see how it can be tempting, or I see the mechanisms at play, and how the way that I am with my daughter, I could see if this was worse, or if I was more desperate, or if I didn't care about my daughter's feelings, or I was more scared of being late, that I might actually gaslight my daughter. But and I appreciate that, absolutely. But the example, let's look at it again. Telling her that she is just fine when she clearly isn't. Telling her that she is just fine. So when the daughter is not fine, like she's in a grumpy mood or something, or she tripped and fell and isn't actually hurt, but you're like, oh, you're just fine. Is that gaslighting? I don't know. Parenting is weird. There's just a lot of things that you do as a parent that if you really think about it, it's like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that kind of invalidation of my child's feelings. But sometimes you're just like, look, you're fine. Let's keep moving. Not to say that that's always a good idea, but going on, or giving her a hard time for making us late for school by demanding to wear a different pair of tights, meaning that the daughter wants to wear a different pair of tights, and then yelling or being in a bad mood towards your daughter, when in reality it was your own fault as a parent that you're late because you didn't start the morning routine earlier. Yeah, I wouldn't call that gaslighting. It's not even really in the category. You're distorted, right? You're blaming someone. And that's the thing, that's the way that lay people use it, and that's not gaslighting. It could be gaslighting if it was part of an overall effort of brainwashing, but just being distorted, like you have a parent who is freaking out about being late and is trying to get daughter ready, and daughter's like, I want to wear a different pair of tights, and then the mom's like, we don't have time for that, like, we gotta go. And you're a jerk face to your kid, and your kid starts to cry, and you're like, get in the car, let's go. And you're later thinking, I think I was blaming my daughter for being late. Really, it's my fault. The fact that my daughter wanted to wear a different pair of tights, that's not a big deal. I shouldn't have punished my daughter for my own faults. Yeah, okay, that's not gaslighting. We don't have a word for that. That's the kind of thing. It's just like when it comes. I've learned that when it comes to these kinds of concepts, people, when there isn't a concept for a thing, people will drag an adjacent concept into that space, therefore diluting the concept or just misusing it. We don't have a lot of words for a lot of things, even though the English language is one of the most populated languages of words. We just have so many words for things because of I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm a nerd for linguistics, and I watch a lot of linguistic YouTube channels and also like accent YouTube channels. I'm kind of upset because it has to do with like history and also how things develop. It's just really fascinating. And there's just one YouTuber called, he's called like Word. I want to give a shout out to him. It's called Word. Let's load it. Rob Words. Rob, like Robert. Rob Words. And he's great. I think he's British. And I just watched a video from him, and he's talked about this before. And the videos are really well scripted, and he's entertaining, and he'll make fun of himself and stuff. But in the English language, it has origins from, we call it a Germanic language because of the Germanic people that lived in the Danish, the Anglos and the Saxons. When they came over to England, they developed Old English, but it was, it morphed into Old English anyway. And then you had the Norman invasion, which were French people in, 1,000 years ago. And then you had just all these new words, and new grammar and stuff. And I learned that that's where attorney general comes from, because the general is an adjective or a clarifier or something, right? How in other language, like French, you'll put the adjective afterwards, right? And so we have these words like time immemorial. is this atypical construction of putting the adjective later, and it just makes sense because the whole attorney general thing, I always just thought it was so weird. Because when you just hear the phrase, you're like, whatever. But when you understand what they actually mean by that term, you're just like, why isn't it general attorney? Everything else is that way, like associate attorney or it's like saying professor general or professor associate or professor vice or president vice. Anyway, so he talked about how we kind of doubled our vocabulary because we had French influx 1,000 years ago, and then we had more words that had been added because the French came back at some point, and people started adding French because it was considered to be fancy, like in the 1700s. Anyway, so we just have a lot of words. But we still don't have a lot of words for things. And there's a subreddit called, I think, Ask Psychology that I look at every once in a while. And I would say 90% of the posts on the subreddit Ask Reddit is lay people asking for a word for something. They'll be like, so what's the word for when you're angry at your mom and it's a Wednesday and you're grumpy and you just want to be left alone? What's the psychological concept for that? And people are like, there isn't one, because there aren't. And I get it. I guess a lot of people, they hear words for things in psychology and they just think, there's got to be they probably have a word for everything. It's like, no, we don't. We don't have a word for everything. In fact, vast majority of human experiences we don't have a word for. There's just not enough time, or I don't know. So with gaslighting, it's happening with that because there's a lot of experiences, and maybe I need to look at the bright side or the silver lining that people are starting to reckon with how they distort. Maybe people just need to think about distortion, and maybe they just need that word. And I find that a lot of clinicians don't have access to that term. And it applies a lot, Anyway, so going on, Manny from London. Isn't this a bit much? I mean, isn't parenting also about presenting a worldview to your kids? And are such little lies necessarily so terrible? Of course, long-term, parents lying to their kids can cause a lot of damage, but this struck me as a bit paranoid. What do you think? And if you read the whole article, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'm sorry if you've already been sent this article a million times. Thanks. End of email. Well, I hadn't been sent this article, at least as far as I know. So yeah. All right. Let's look to see if there's any more emails about gaslighting. All right. So this new thing that Stacy suggested of putting all the emails into one doc has been really helpful, I'm realizing already, because there's a lot of questions about gaslighting that I have been neglecting and are very pertinent to this conversation. And it's good to kind of get them all out in one fell swoop. So we have patron Emily from Denver. She says, I just listened to your episode called That's Not Gaslighting. And in a weird way, I can understand the confusion in popular culture even more than before. I feel like the definition of gaslighting on the internet has been similar to the quote from Justice Potter Stewart on what qualifies as pornography, simply, I know it when I see it. But the problem is that everyone sees it differently. For instance, in the shame lie example that you gave, if the wife finds herself questioning her judgment or memory, can that be enough to qualify it as an instance of gaslighting? Just chiming in. Yeah, I don't remember the exact example that I gave, but shame lying happens a lot. Like if, for example, your husband, didn't clean the kitchen or something, and you say, hey, I thought you agreed you're going to clean the kitchen. And your husband says, I did clean the kitchen. And he knows that he did not clean the kitchen. And is that gaslighting? Well, again, it might be. That's the thing. Like the quote unquote definite, and I think this is true of a lot of, maybe this is something I need to really drive home in my head, is that people reading a definition or even a DSM criteria set will think of it in the similar way of how one defines things like a tree or the definition of a word or something, like the definition of granite or the definition of a cabinet or the definition of a Seattleite or something. These are, although there's fuzziness around the edges, like, with a Seattleite, someone from Seattle, is it someone that's born here or someone that has, how long do you have to be here to be, there's a little fuzziness, but it's not super complicated. But when it comes to what is gaslighting, and I provide my definition, that does not give anyone the ability to just look at behavior and know if that is gaslighting or not, Plus, like, it's not like there's a psychology police force that is going to come round people up for misusing the term, and of course my opinion is different from other clinicians. Other experts would have different opinions, and that's all fine. But so maybe that's part of it, is that people are looking for a way to grab onto this, and it's just not grabbable. I'll just tell you from my own personal experience, when I'm actually labeling something as gaslighting, it is, often it's very easy to detect. That's kind of the thing, is that I think people don't actually have contact with actual stories of abuse. I know a lot of you do, but if you don't, it wouldn't be uncommon for someone to not have any personal experiences. You might have heard stories, you might have even seen depictions in documentaries or in fictional depictions, but those are not sufficient. Abuse is so complicated. It's such a specific thing, and it's so all-encompassing, and every case is different. We heard earlier from a patron talking about how their gaslighting, their abuse was so subtle, and he was so smart, and from the outside you wouldn't notice it. There weren't the classic phrases that were being used, and that's very common. But at the same time, when you have those stories in your mind, and you've experienced them firsthand the way experts like myself have, then it's not hard to detect, and it's not hard to differentiate. And it's also not hard to look at other kinds of behaviors and say, like, well, that's not close, And this has to do with a lot of things in our field that are popular things that are talked about, like autism spectrum or ADHD or borderline or bipolar. When you have clinical experience, firsthand experience with people who have these neurodivergences or these experiences or these disorders, then you understand it. And to have a layperson who watches a YouTube video or reads the criteria, the DSM, it's just not enough. And I know that that's frustrating. There's a chance that you could listen to all of my yammering about gaslighting and still not be able to detect it if it was in front of you, because it's just too complicated. As I think some of the emailers are getting into, it's just like, well, if I believe I'm being gaslit, am I accurate? Or what if I'm not accurate? What if I think I'm being gaslit, but in reality I'm the gaslighter, or it's not really up to the threshold level that you are saying, Kirk, then what? Well, the thing is you can be not gaslit according to me and still be harmed. If someone's lying, that's the other thing that I think it also relates to, is like, if someone shame lies to you, that's some fucking bullshit right there. And the fact that people feel like they need to have a more intense label means that we have diluted the word lie and deception to such an extent that it doesn't mean anything anymore. It's not and I would argue that lying is worse than gaslighting in a lot of ways, because, or at least a similar transgression. Shame lying is not fucking okay. If you didn't clean the kitchen, just say you didn't clean the kitchen. Don't lie to my face about it. It's not okay. But it's not gaslighting. It's okay. It doesn't have to be gaslighting, Anyway, going on. blah, blah, blah. What if she brings it up again and he lies again and again? Does that make it a campaign about the shame line? What if she brings it up again? She's like, hey, you didn't clean the kitchen and you need to admit it. You need to own that. I'm reminded of something that happened on Love is Blind. Wasn't someone lying about something, or in Sister Wives? On Sister Wives, there's a catfishing. If you're not watching my reaction videos on YouTube about Sister Wives, and you're interested in catfishing, I would at least watch those episodes. There's going to be a number of episodes that are just about this catfishing case that happened to one of the cast members on Sister Wives, and it is fascinating. I mean, the depth that they go into and the complication and the victim of the gaslighting, Mary, she's absolutely a victim, and she was manipulated and coerced and threatened, and she deserves all of the sympathy and help and support. And it very much looks like, and her daughter will state this, that Mary in the beginning, before the threats began with this catfisher, Mary was cheating on, was having an emotional affair on her husband. And, you could say that in a polygamous marriage, she deserves to move on if she wants to. Okay. But at the same time, she wasn't being upfront with her life with anyone in her family. And she was also, it sounds like, dragging her daughter into it and trying to convince her daughter that this catfisher was awesome. And the daughter's like, this is a catfisher. He's refusing to meet with you. He's refusing to do video conference. And that picture of that person is absurd, And so, years later, Mary is continuing to refuse to admit to her daughter that, yes, I was victimized and I was essentially having an emotional affair in the beginning, and I was doing it voluntarily in the beginning for whatever period of time. Or I was flirting around with the idea of possibly having an emotional affair at the beginning, and that is wrong of me. I shouldn't have done that. But that pales in comparison to the victimization that I went through, But she won't admit that at the beginning part. She just frames the whole thing as innocent on her part, from the beginning to the end. And she was innocent once she was being victimized, and because I think she started to fawn. But anyway, so it's just people will do that, and I think that there's a chance that Mary is shame lying, and she continues to lie and lie and lie. Is that gaslighting? Well, is it a campaign? And that's what you're asking, Emily from Denver. You're saying, is it a campaign? Well, if it's purposeful and voluntary, and we also have to define what purposeful means, right? Like if we held Mary down and just forced her somehow to tell the truth, it's like, I'll put a gun to your head. You got to tell the truth. And she says, yeah, I admit that I am downplaying my voluntary participation in the beginning because I'm so ashamed, or something like that. So, one could see that happening, and then that means that she is knowingly minimizing and knowingly deceiving, knowingly lying. And it's been going on for years. Okay, is that gaslighting? It depends. Is it part of a larger pattern of abuse? Because people don't just gaslight to gaslight. They gaslight because they want control, or they are distorting things to such a degree that they are resorting to rage and intimidation. When you think gaslighting, think intimidation, think coercion, think abuse, think control, whether the individual is doing it on purpose or not. And to label something as a campaign or a purposeful, volitional, ongoing, years-long shame lie, again, as I've been saying, that is a massive accusation. And to say it's not gaslighting is not to say that it's not a big fucking deal. It's a big fucking deal what Mary is doing, and her daughter is hurt by it, and it's having a huge effect on the daughter. So it's, that's what I'll say about that. Going on. Is the deciding factor on the liar, gaslighter, or on the other person? I think what you're asking, Emily, is similar to what the other person was asking, is who gets to say if it's gaslighting or not? And I feel like I've already answered that. I think this might be where a lot of confusion lies in pop culture, because even normalized can make people question their faculties. It sounds like the literature applies gaslighting to the actions of the deceptive individual, but the way it's used online has to do with the feeling of the deceived individual. Just chiming in. Yeah, that's well put, actually, better than I could, in that when we feel like we're being deceived, it's a mind screw. And in my longer episodes about gaslighting as a concept, I have provided the other terms like crazy making or lying or what were the other terms that I was using? Brainwashing or tricked, that kind of stuff. Gaslighting, it's a particular thing, and the thing is we have other words for these other things, and I think it's, as I've been saying, I think it's a problem that these other words aren't sufficient. That we can't say this person is going on a campaign of lying to me. They're refusing to admit the truth. The fact that doesn't feel like it has power, and the fact that people are like, feeling like when I'm saying it's not gaslighting, they think that I'm downplaying it. And I'm not saying that's you, Emily. I just think it says something, which isn't fortunate. It's not a fortunate development in our culture going on. So really, gaslit is both a verb and an adjective, and to feel gaslit doesn't mean you were gaslit. To feel like you've been lied to isn't necessarily an indication that you have been lied to. To feel like you've been abused isn't necessarily an indication that you've been abused. Now, for you listening right now, all you listeners, I'm guessing that you know enough to differentiate. But to the average individual, a lot of abusive people think they're being abused, and they don't know that they're distorting. They actually believe, like the example I gave, and it's just a tiny little example of the client that thought that I said that she was a piece of shit. She punished me emotionally. Now, as a therapist and as a specialist in borderline, I am accustomed to it. It doesn't feel great, but it doesn't get under my skin the way it would if I were involved with that person personally, And so she was the one that was distorting, and she was the one who was attacking me unfairly, because I didn't even say anything hostile at all to her. It's not like she heard hostility and had an exaggeratory thing there was zero hostility from me. Working with her was a breeze in a lot of ways, and the sharp edges were very. I was very used to that kind of thing. I am very used to that kind of thing. I identified her as being borderline early and had a pretty good approach to her, pretty relaxed approach and an expectant approach that involved expecting her to do this kind of thing, and I was okay with it. So I wasn't hostile at all. So she just completely made it up, and so she thought that I was lying to her, and she might have thought if it was today, given the cultural context around the word gaslighting, she probably would have said that I was gaslighting her. So it's that going on. A common response to schemas that I have is to succumb, and I've described my attachment style as maybe more on the anxious side, but resigned. So I could see a situation where someone has been gaslit to doubt themselves, but has simply accepted this fact. Does this make a difference? Chiming in, if I understand you right, yeah, it's a risk, right? That, and I'm just repeating what I was saying earlier, and I guess I'm realizing why I guess some people are having a reaction to my talk about gaslighting is that for you or for someone that you might have a tentative grasp on the fact that you were being gaslit, and so, or you wonder if you're being gaslit, and a part of your recovery involves actually fighting to recognize to yourself that you were being abused and that you were being gaslit, but you're not confident because of how confusing it could be, but also just because of having been gaslit, right? And for me to come along and say that, all the things that I say, it could derail some people that are on the road to recovery. And yeah, I'll accept that. But if you have a therapist that specializes in this, which I would hope that everyone would have, and I know that can be hard to access sometimes, but that's the only way really, then I would hope that specialist therapist would walk through that whole thing with you, and you wouldn't need to depend on me to say whether or not you're being gaslit or not. You know what I mean? Going on. It sounds like your conceptualization of gaslighting is very similar to your episode on love bombing. Just chiming in. Yeah, it will have similar language in that there's an overapplication of the term, and there's also a difference between voluntary and involuntary in a similar ratio. Going on. I've been a little confused about the examples given by you for what is gaslighting and what isn't gaslighting. The example that you gave with the couple, and I wonder if it would be appropriate to distinguish the shame lie versus gaslighting by saying one is a lie about the situation in order to get a desired outcome, and one is a lie about the person in order to maintain a real or imagined power dynamic. Yeah, I hear that, but that's not the way that I'm using it anyway. Shame, again, just looking at an instance or even a campaign of one particular lie or one style of lying does not gaslighting make, right? If someone was, if you had a husband who just always lied about a particular thing, I have a friend, someone that close to me who always lies about, well, I don't want to get into specifics, but I'll just say I have someone who's very close to me who has a thing that they will shame lie about all the time. And when I'm as a therapist and as a friend, it doesn't really bother me. I've learned to accept it, and I understand it. I conceptualize it not as a personal attack or some moral failing, but the abuse that they went through. And when I very occasionally will have conversations with them about it, and I'm not confronting them, I'm not even telling them to change. I'm just saying, like, know that you don't have to hide that kind of stuff because I'm okay. There's no threat. I'm not, if things go badly, I'll be here and I won't hurt you. And yet it doesn't really change. The lies keep happening, and the person keeps upholding the premise of the lies, or makes like sideways lies to make up for the original lie that's being caught. And it's fucking annoying, and it does erode trust a little bit, but it's just isolated to that sensitivity that they have. They are not gaslighting me. They're not abusing me. They are lying straight to my fucking face over and over again, even when they're basically caught red-handed, and yet they're not gaslighting me. That's a thing. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case, right? But so to say that you're trying to differentiate between, let's see, what was the sentence you said? Let's see, the shame lie versus gaslighting by saying one is a lie about a situation in order to get a desired outcome, which is what we're calling a lie. Yeah, that's a lie. And the other one is a lie about the person in order to maintain a real or imagined power dynamic. A lot of gaslighting, like the borderline client that I pointed out, it would not be the desire for power. It's just the way that the world looks to them, because they have a distortion. Anyway, what would be the difference between a narcissistic person who consistently gaslights their partner but believes that they are saying, but believes what they are saying. So what's the difference between a narcissistic person and, by narcissistic person, I don't know what you mean by that. When dear listener, if you ever email me, you have to clarify what you mean by narcissism, because I don't know where you're coming from. By context, I think you're talking about a psychopath. But going on, so a narcissistic person who consistently gaslights their partner, but believes what they are saying. Believes what they're saying. Oh, so maybe that is a narcissistic person. Anyway, versus a pathological liar who just lies left and right to their partner. Okay, that's a psychopath. Or possibly that's another little deep dive, or not a little, but a medium deep dive I want to do is on pathological lying. I've been wanting to do that for maybe 10 years. Versus a pathological liar who just lies left and right to their partner and maybe also believes what they are saying. What would be the difference between a narcissistic person who accidentally gaslights versus a pathological liar who lies left and right to the partner? Well, a pathological liar might be gaslighting, but again, it has to be within an overall cycle of abuse. That's the key. And I hope that I've said that enough times so that we can kind of at least put that idea to rest. And by the way, I might sound like I'm frustrated. I'm not. I love this kind of shit, man, because I wouldn't have clarity about. As a professor, one of my favorite things was when students started to ask questions, because one, it means that people are paying attention and they're interested, and two, it gives me an opportunity to clarify. Without asking these questions, a lot of people in the audience would have similar confusion or similar wonderings, right? And I think it's incredibly important that these things be understood. We don't talk, just generally, we don't talk enough about lies. We have a very childish way of just talking about lying. Like if you watched Love is Blind with me with Ashley and Tyler, I talked about this a little bit, in that given our cultural, very simplistic understanding of liars and who lies and who doesn't, Ashley sees Tyler, I think accurately, that he is a good man. Therefore, he can't be lying, I think is what she is concluding, because good people don't lie. Because people who lie, especially about having kids or not, or about the storyline of the kids, they have to be bad people. They have to be nefarious, pathological liars that are quote unquote a narcissist or whatever. And that is just a gross simplification, and gives the liars more power and makes us more susceptible to lying. Because if we conclude, okay, well, that's a good person, then I'm just going to frame everything that happens from them as not lying. It really denies. And also a lot of us will engage in shame lying or other kinds of distorted lying. We do it all the time. Wishful thinking lying. There's a lot of different lying that we do, and there's just not enough talk about it, and it's really destructive. And it's just not gaslighting all the time, So going on, if it is the intent, in the example you gave, it sounds like the narcissistic gaslighting partner didn't intend to manipulate the partner. They thought they were being helpful. Going on. For systemic gaslighting, my initial thought upon hearing that was the campaign led by the cigarette industry, but it sounds like that may be closer to motivated reasoning or vested interest in what you say. Just chiming in. The cigarette industry, they knew that they were trying to obscure the science that smoking cigarettes was associated with an increase in medical complications like emphysema and cancer. They knew it because they were aware of the science, and they went on a mission, and they knowingly, and I mean, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure they have like evidence of like corporate memos and communications of them knowing, the administration of these, and also the various different cigarette companies working together on this to trick the public, to fund other research, to find other other results, and they knew that they were lying, and they, I think, also knew that eventually they would be discovered, right? And then the whole tobacco industry would become dismantled or something, And so, yeah, they knew it. And again, to say that they were lying and they caused millions of deaths, that should be enough. That should be enough to condemn and hate these individuals. I mean, they killed people because they wanted money, which is deplorable, just fucking deplorable. And to say, well, it's not really gaslighting, does not diminish the evil involved. But was it systemic gaslighting? It's harder to evaluate this because you're talking about a collective of perpetrators and a collective of victims. And were the victims, was the public unsure about how to evaluate reality? I would say no, because the cigarette industry was just, handing over a bunch of their research that was supporting that it wasn't associated. So people were still standing on what they thought was science and evidence and the expert opinion, but that expert opinion and that research was being essentially manufactured. So I don't think the public was left thinking that they couldn't judge reality. They were just being lied to. That's the thing. Like if someone comes up to you and just starts lying to you and tricks you into believing like an elaborate story, say you have a partner that is cheating on you constantly and doesn't love you, and they lie and convince, and they do so many things to convince you that they love you and that they're not cheating on you. Is that gaslighting? Well, no, because gaslighting involves making you question your judgment. Now, after you discover it, you might question your judgment, and I guess maybe you could say that is kind of a gaslighting, but it's not gaslighting. What it is just psychopathic, horrific lying. It's fucking evil. It's awful. It's horrible. It's not gaslighting. It can be horrible. It's abusive. It can be abusive and not gaslighting. That's the thing. Gaslighting it's a pretty narrow thing. And I think it's important, because I talked about this in a recent episode, I think we need to have not only precision in language, but we also have to get back these terms and have the words like lie and deception to be felt as a horrible, evil thing commonly. Not all the time, but in that instance, right? So I hope that makes sense. Let's look for any more emails that I haven't already indirectly answered. Nope, that is it. No more instances of the word gaslight. Or maybe I should search for gaslit. Gaslit. Is there a gaslit in this whole thing? Nope, zero gaslit. There's one gaslight because I have a plan to make a little short video about gaslighting, maybe. I don't know. But that does it. I like this new system. Tune in next time when I do it again on another topic. And please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.